Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 224, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, February 16th, 2024. Welcome back to the big show here, Holy City Center Radio. It's your Friday edition. It's time to get out there and have some fun. I hope you had a good week. Hope your weekend is even better. If you need some plans, need to find something to do, be sure to go to holycitycenter.com, click on events, and you can see everything that's coming up, not just this weekend, but beyond. Been pretty quiet here, not a whole lot to report back on. Not complaining, just been doing work. No events or anything like that. But by the time we roll around to Monday's episode, and Wednesdays, I should have some things to report back on that I, plan on doing, but more about those in a later episode. For now, let's get into the latest news so you can get on with the rest of your day and get out there and enjoy the weekend. We have several legislative updates. First up, the Compassionate Care Act. This is also the medical cannabis legislation that we've talked about before. And by a vote of 26-17, the South Carolina State Senate passed the Compassionate Care Act on this past Tuesday. The bill allows for the use of marijuana in certain products, but it would still be illegal to smoke. The bill now heads to the South Carolina House, where its fate is uncertain, to say the least. The House tends to be even more conservative than the Senate here in this state. A similar bill was defeated in the House back in 2022. And you may remember last year, another similar bill was defeated, not so much defeated as it was removed from consideration due to a technicality. One particular person in the legislature, whose name escapes me now, but you can look it up if you like, decided there was some technicality where they didn't bring it up to a vote, and then that year's legislation session ended. So, that technicality shouldn't be a concern this time around, but the vote is still very much up in the air. As I said, the House tends to be even more conservative as far as their politics. And as we know, in pretty much that I can think of, I don't think any red state or any state that is dominated in the sense that this state is by Republicans, most cannabis-related legislation doesn't pass. This legislation is the most conservative medicinal marijuana legislation you can think of. Not only is it just for medicinal purposes, which other states have that as well, but it's very, very narrow as far as what products can be used. You heard me say at the top that it would still be illegal to smoke marijuana in this state, even for medicinal purposes. So it'd be things like, maybe candies or tinctures or what have you. So it'd be very, very limited into who can get it. It's only certain conditions, and there's still going to be hoops to jump through for those people. But if it passes, at least there's an option, even if it's not the easiest for people who need it for medicinal reasons. So we'll see what happens. It still has to get through the House, who could propose some changes and things, but it is moving forward thanks to that Senate's vote. Now, related to that legislation, it also ties into a story we've been talking about recently. So you may remember that South Carolina's hemp industry has been struggling with some new regulations that prohibit labeling infused food and drinks as containing THC. So you may remember DHEC came out and basically said, hey, even though hemp and hemp-related products are legal here in the state, you can't advertise that they contain THC or hemp. Specifically, there's the Delta 8 and Delta 9 strands of cannabis, which have a little bit of the THC, which is what gets you high, basically. That's what THC is. But it's a very, very minuscule amount that's allowed in like CBD products, etc. But they said you can't advertise that that's what's in these beverages or foods, which of course has led to confusion because a place like High Rise Beverage Company has now pulled their products, no longer distributing them here in the state because their beverages mention what is in the beverages, which you would think consumers would want, number one. And number two, the business, that's just good business. You don't want to be sneaking ingredients into things and not telling them what's in that. So it's caused a lot of confusion. But an amendment was added to the Compassionate Care Act that I was just talking about that would basically limit what the State Department of Health and Environmental Control can do, and that's DHEC, who I mentioned before. It would limit their power over those product labels for hemp-infused beverages. If the bill were to pass, DHEC wouldn't be allowed to stop these companies from providing consumers with an accurate listing of ingredients. So that means they could list that there was THC, Delta 8, Delta 9, whatever it may be. They would be allowed to actually put their ingredients on there, which seems to be common sense. So glad that this amendment was added. The amendment was introduced by State Senator Dion Tedder. He's a Democrat from Charleston, and it comes as a response to all this confusion that happened when DHEC released a letter back on January 22nd, which mentioned all the stuff I was just talking about a few moments ago. So I've kind of already gone over it, but the gist of it was that labels couldn't declare that a hemp-infused food or beverage product contains THC or even CBD, even though both of those chemicals can appear in legal hemp. Like I said, there's a certain percentage that's perfectly legal in the state for any products to include THC or CBD. CBD, another strand of cannabis that has no THC in it, no psychoactive properties, or whatever the official name is. But it could have a minuscule amount. It could happen, and it's legal in this state. The department also went on to say that the precise amount of THC in a product cannot be included on the label either. So again, this is just doesn't make any sense. We all, as a country, want to know what's in our food and beverages, and to force these companies to not include that could be dangerous, because even if it's just a little bit of THC, maybe an adult doesn't even feel anything if it's super minuscule, but perhaps I've just got this seltzer here. Doesn't say there's anything in it that's, concerning. Here, child, have a little bit of my drink. Like, who would want that? That's a bad idea. So hopefully this amendment will fix those concerns and allow these companies to operate as they should be allowed to under the law. The amendment, will provide some clarity, hopefully, to beverage companies or food companies, even though it seems at this point it's really just beverage companies in the state. And that way people know exactly what they're purchasing and what's in it. So that is included in that Compassionate Care Act. Again, passed in the Senate. Very uncertain future in the House, as well as what will Governor McMaster do if it does pass the House. So still a long ways to go, but that's the latest on the Compassionate Care Act. Another update. This is a very sinful episode. First, we're talking about cannabis-related things. Now we're talking about liquor sales. So all the vices, apparently. So the South Carolina House has given approval to a bill that would allow liquor stores to stay open on Sundays for a few hours, assuming that their local governments allow it. So that basically the state would say, totally cool to have liquor sales on Sundays, which currently is not allowed. But the local government, particular cities, counties, whatever, could still put a stop to that. But on the state level, they would allow it. Now, supporters of this say it's time, obviously, to allow this. It's an antiquated, centuries-old rule based on religion that designated Sunday as a day of rest. As we know, in modern society, plenty of people work on Sundays, and why not liquor stores if they would like to? Supporters also say this would help businesses, especially those in tourist areas, because tourists spend well over $20 billion annually in South Carolina. And, when they come here on Sundays or whether they're on vacation or taking a weekend trip, whatever it may be, oftentimes they're surprised to find out that they can't purchase any alcohol on Sunday, especially if they're, wanting to maybe have a beach day, even though beaches don't allow alcohol, but you get it. They're surprised that they're just unable to purchase liquor for personal use at home. Obviously, they can go to a bar, and that's a whole different story. But it would make sense. These businesses could make a lot more money. So the House voted in favor of the bill by a vote of 68 to 44. Most of the no votes were coming for the most conservative Republicans in the House and a few rural Democrats. The rural areas have expressed more concern, that this would harm the mom and pop stores because they're not in a tourist area. They might not be as busy, and it might cost them more money to be open on Sundays than it will actually help them. So no surprise that folks in those areas voted in that way. However, it still passed the House, as I mentioned. There is one more approval vote that it has to go through before it heads to the Senate. But ABC News 4 in their coverage has said it seems like that's just a formality. It should get that last vote, and then it'll head over to the Senate. So, this legislation will join another bill that's currently being debated, which would allow customers to pick up alcohol when they get their groceries or food order brought out to them in a parking lot. You can order in advance for pickup or what have you. And when you get to these places, alcohol can now be part of that, delivery to your car, which currently it is not. This also includes things like DoorDash, Uber Eats. If you wanted to order something delivered to your home, not ordering for pickup, those delivery services could now bring alcohol, in that order. So if you order groceries, decide to order some beer with those groceries, they could bring it to your home. That is currently not allowed either. So that would change both of those situations. So we have those two different pieces of legislation that are currently being debated and worked through. This one has a far better chance of passing than the Compassionate Care Act involving cannabis that I mentioned in the first section of the show. But you never know what could hold it up. But the more conservative House has passed these, so we'll see what happens in the Senate and what Governor McMaster ends up doing. But that's the latest on those pieces of legislation. And now we've got a pretty significant update as it relates to book challenges here in this state and how they will be handled going forward. So the state could end up having the final say over books challenged in any low country school libraries if this new piece of legislation, or I should say this new regulation, passes. So on Tuesday, the State Board of Education passed a regulation that would make books in public South Carolina schools and classroom libraries controlled by the state instead of the school board in those particular areas. Now, although they passed the regulation, that decision of theirs is being sent to the South Carolina General Assembly, where they will have to have the final say on it. If it clears the Senate and the House, it could then become law. So, State Board of Education's already signed off on it. Now our legislators will have to determine what they want to do with this. Just like all these other bills and things we talk about, it's got to pass both sides of the chamber and then be signed into law by Henry McMaster, but it certainly could end up happening. So under this new prospective regulation, if a book is challenged, it is not only at risk of being removed from a school district, but also from libraries in the entire state. If passed, challenged books would go to a committee made up of the State Board of Education members. So as it stands right now on this regulation, not every committee or board member would even have to read the entire book that's being challenged. So that adds an interesting wrinkle to this as well. You would think they would need to at least get a pretty good idea of the context of whatever is being challenged. But if there's just a particular page or two that they find objectionable enough, they can just go ahead and ban that book from whatever particular district, all the districts, and even libraries across the state. Now, one piece that, if you're going to pass this, one thing I do like about this regulation is that only parents or guardians of a student would be able to challenge a book, and they're limited to 5 complaints made each month. So this would prevent a situation like we're seeing in Dorchester District 2 right now, where one woman challenged more than 150 books without even having a child in the school district. So that would take away, this backlog that this person's created, as well as preventing community members who have no real stake in what's happening in the schools because they have no children in those schools from making these complaints. If the legislation passes, the books that are currently under review in Dorchester District 2 will be paused and will go to the state committee for review. So depending on if this passes or not, and when it passes, we might see these books be some of the first going through this new process. The South Carolina Department of Education would also issue a form for people to challenge books. So there'd be an official form for them to fill out. When they're making the complaint, if they make any reference to FCC guidelines, which has to do with what can be, what can be said or shown on TV and radio broadcasts, they would not allow that to be a reason to challenge books. So, for instance, the FCC has certain guidelines, and obviously it's different for things like cable versus, regular over-the-air broadcast stations like your local ABC, NBC, Fox, CBS, etc. Um, so they have particular guidelines. So anything that's, kind of available to anyone is not a premium service. Same with radio. Sirius XM has no real rules, nothing they really have to go through with the FCC as compared to like a traditional terrestrial radio station. So there's certain words, certain things that can't be broadcast, and someone wouldn't be able to say, hey, well, the FCC doesn't allow this word to be said on, CBS or whatever local radio station. So it shouldn't be allowed in libraries. And that's not going to be the case. So that will not be allowed. So no one can point to language in a book with a complaint and saying that that same language can't be shown on television. Ergo, it shouldn't be in books in libraries. So that's another good piece of this, because obviously there's a difference. And now, besides obviously people, opponents against this, normally censorship, book banning, being opposed to that. That's, you can expect that in these situations. But another concern they have is that they would prefer local school board members ultimately make the decisions about what books are allowed in schools and libraries, because they're voting following the principles of the people they represent. So that would seem to make sense. Like maybe Charleston County or a particular school board in the city of Charleston, they have a community that may be different from a more rural district elsewhere in the state. And these folks who have been voted in they're supposed to be doing what their constituents want, the people that they represent. And they may have different values or takes on certain books and languages based on where they are. That's just the way it is. Certain communities, no community is exactly the same. Obviously, there's some stuff that I'm sure everyone agrees upon that shouldn't be in children's books and available to them. But, there are nuances where some districts may say, hey, we're okay with this, and others may say no based on who they represent. So I tend to agree with that side more than anything. But so we'll see what happens. As I said, State Board of Education's already given it the green light, but it has to go through our state legislature. Who knows how long that could take, but I'll certainly keep you updated. That'll do it for this Friday edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Remember to visit the website if you're looking for things to do or the latest news. You can also help out this podcast by liking it, rating it, reviewing it, whatever you can do on the current platform you're listening to the show on. Please go ahead and do that. You can also go to patreon.com/Holy City Center to help out, support the website, the podcast, and everything I do. That's a great way to help out as well. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System, who produces this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And a big thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show as well. Have an amazing weekend. I will talk to you all again on Monday, but until then, good night and good luck.